Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, November 5th edition of ATS Radio. My name is Adam Burke. I'll be your host for the next hour or so as we chat with professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bettor.com. We're talking about week 10 of the college football season, week 9 of the NFL season. We'll go over some power ratings, some picks, game predictions, game breakdowns, all that sort of thing here on today's show. We got a lot of stuff going on over at ATS.io right now. Lots of picks and predictions articles for college football and the NFL. I wrote a big, long Breeders' Cup Classic preview this morning over at the website, so make sure you check that out. New promotions up over at PointsBet Sportsbook for this week. Some good stuff in advance of the Clemson versus Notre Dame game, and also their regular weekly promotions over there at PointsBet. So go to the Sportsbook promotion section over at ATS.io. Take a look at all of the different offers that are available here for this week across the market. And of course, make sure you download the ATS app as well. You can get that in the Google Play Store. You can get that in the Apple Store. It is a bet tracker, but it is a whole hell of a lot more than that. Stats, odds, information, article integration from the website. Lots of great things at your fingertips there in that ATS app, which again, you can find over at ATS.io, or you can find in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, depending on whether or not you have an Android or an iOS device. With that, we bring on today's guest. That is professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. And Brad, how's it going today, man?
It's going well, man. How the heck are you doing?
Hanging in there. A lot of stuff going on here this week. A lot of market movement here this morning, as you and I were talking about. Obviously, still trying to figure out who actually won the presidential election. Good week for sports betting, though, nationally. 3 states allowing legalized sports betting. Nebraska allowing games of chance, which will open the door down the line for them to legalize sports betting. So in 2021, we're going to add several more states to the mix, Ohio probably being one of them. So a good week from a sports betting standpoint, at least. Of course, the global market's lighting up with election betting as well. But you and I are going to focus here on college football and the NFL. And in fact, we're going to start here with a focus on the Pac-12. The MAC got underway on Wednesday night. We talked about that conference on last Thursday's show. The MAC will begin play here on Saturday, very early, mind you, on Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, Arizona State and USC. But let's sort of run through our power ratings a little bit, run through some bullet point thoughts on some of these teams here. And starting with me, I've got Oregon and USC both power rated as an 83 here at the top of the conference.
I got Oregon slightly higher. Those are certainly my top 2 teams. About Oregon, about a point better. They were about 3 points better than USC, but obviously 3 key starters out for the Ducks. I downgraded them a couple points. We'll get to the game, but it looks like the market significantly downgraded the Ducks after a couple of their key players went out. But I think anybody, at least doing this from a power ratings aspect, is going to have the Ducks as the best team in the North and USC the best team in the South.
Well, and as we move down the line here, I think we'll just stop and talk about one team for a second, and that's Utah. Because I think after Utah, you kind of get a lot of teams that are, not separated by a whole lot. Maybe you've got Washington closer to Utah than I do. I've got Washington 4 points behind Utah. Washington would be a 7-point dog on a neutral to Oregon and USC for me, but Utah at an 80, 3-point dog on a neutral to the 2 teams we just talked about, Oregon and USC. So is that kind of how it sets up for you? You got Oregon and USC together, then Utah, and then a little bit of a gap towards Washington?
No, obviously a gap after Oregon and USC, maybe not big enough. We'll see. I got a lot of overlays in this week's game, so I'm gonna have to do some significant adjusting compared to let's see what happens this weekend. But I got Utah and Washington within about a half a point of one another. I'm guessing I'm a little bit more higher on Washington in the marketplace. I really like Jimmy Lake, their new head coach, who was their DC there. But a lot of people hate his offensive coordinator hire. So I'm guessing that's going to be one of the positions that I take. And I could tell because I got a huge overlay in the Washington Cal game in favor of Washington. So, yeah, I got those 2 a little bit closer, but clearly that's 3 and 4 as far as me in the Pac-12.
Well, and the thing about a team like Washington, and we talk about this a lot, the sexy teams get the benefit of the doubt. Washington's just not really a sexy team. They play a lot of defense. They win a lot of low-scoring games. You do wonder about their offense now. They don't have Jacob Eason anymore, but I think you could make a case, and a lot of people have made the case, that even though Eason was drafted, that he was kind of underwhelming up there in Seattle. So maybe their offense gets a little better from that. But as you said, some questions about the offense here for Washington, and that's probably the primary difference between my power rating and yours.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't wow me offensively really since 2016. I mean, Browning at quarterback, never really got better. He is what he was there as a 4-year starter. Eason, showed his great arm at some point, but, they just didn't put it together. I mean, in some games you thought, I can make a case that Washington was the best team in the Pac-12, and then just consistency from him. And a lot of it was Eason. Chris Peterson, I think a lot of people, I thought he did a really good job there, but again, the upward trajectory wasn't there. Once they made the college football playoff in 2016, they haven't gotten any better. In fact, they've taken a couple of steps back, and a lot of it's offensively. Defensively, they're still more than capable, and I credit that to Jimmy Lake, who is now the head coach for them. And at least, big thing for me, and this is why I follow it, I look and see what they're doing on the recruiting trail, and Washington this year doing pretty well on the recruiting trail. So I expect, maybe it doesn't happen this year, but I expect a little bit of a bump in that program here starting in 2021.
Yeah, I got Washington a very slight favorite here against Cal in this week's game, and we did see a little bit of Cal money earlier on in the week. I've got Washington power rated at 76, Cal 73.5, Arizona State 73, and then Stanford 72. I get the feeling, and again, you mentioned this already, that I'm either low on Stanford or high on Oregon, and it could be a combination of the two here. But to me, Cal, ASU, and Stanford are all, to a degree, kind of interchangeable there in this conference.
Yeah, gonna agree with you there. I mean, if I'm stack ranking them nationally and ranking the 127 teams that are playing right now, major college football, I have California 42, I have Stanford 43, and I have Arizona State 44. So, I mean, flip a coin between those three teams. Stanford's had, and this is why I'm surprised so much Stanford money's coming in. I mean, Stanford had 3 key guys, including their left tackle, opt out on the season. So, I mean, I certainly think the Cardinal are improved. But again, I dropped their power rating 1.5 points because of their opt-outs here in the recent weeks. California, a lot of sharp guys that I respect, are really high on the Bears. They had a key opt-out on the defensive line, but a lot of people really like Justin Wilcox and think that this is his best team that he's had. As long as they have a healthy quarterback, Chase Garbers. I mean, when he was healthy last year, they were 7-0. When he started a game and finished the game, they were 7-0. And then you go to Arizona State. I think if you're going to ask me what team has the most upward trajectory, I think it's the Sun Devils. Why? Because they figured it out at quarterback. I really like Jaden Daniels. And there's been a lot of publicity that they have a stud true freshman running back. We're going to see him early on Saturday. If they're settled at those 2 spots, I think Herm Edwards and company can surprise some people this year.
Now, one team that when I talked about the Pac-12 yesterday with Kyle Hunter, one team that we had a big difference of opinion on was Washington State. I have Washington State power rated at 70. He had them down at 66. So we had a 4-point difference between the two of us, which is pretty rare, especially early on at the outset of a season here, which is essentially what the Pac-12 is doing, just getting started. How are you looking at Wazoo this year? Because Nick Rolovich, it's not that different of an offense going from the air raid to the run and shoot. They will run a little bit more than Mike Leach did. Not dramatically different, is going with a true freshman starting quarterback, which is kind of interesting. But also Rolovich, he was very good at Hawaii. A lot of people kind of like his personality, sort of like him a lot as a coach. But then he got up to Pullman, and he had some issues there right out of the gate, with some of the Black Lives Matter things and stuff like that. So you wonder about chemistry within the program. Is this just a team you're staying away from here early on, or do you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on them?
I got him 69 as far as power rating, and I'm 0 to 100, with 100 being at the top, pretty much. That's the basic formula there. And the bottom team's right around 40. So it's not like it's, the bottom team's 0, obviously, if you're going to have point spread. So Yeah, middle of the road team nationally, obviously well below average when you're just considering Power Five. So yeah, I expect them to take a major step back this year. Even though I like Rolovich, I really like the job he did at Hawaii. I like his personality. I like that he follows me on Twitter. Uh, but I'm not biased because you know why? I bet against them this week. I like Oregon State this week. I'm going to fade Washington State with a new head coach, limited practice, some off-field kind of issues there, and I'm gonna buy Oregon State, who I have right both teams almost equally in my power ratings, but give a little bit of home field advantage, and then just the situation here. I like the Beavers to beat the Cougars. Keep in mind, I mean, the Beavers should have beaten the Cougars last year. Came down to multiple overtimes, and Oregon State, losing by 1 point.
Yeah, I like Oregon State a little bit this year, too. I think Jonathan Smith's done a fantastic job there in Corvallis with that team. What about the bottom of this conference here? UCLA, Arizona, Colorado. Any buy signs with any of those three teams?
If there would be one, it'd be UCLA, just from a talent aspect. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, their quarterback, if he finally figures it out, stops turning the football over, I think they probably have the highest upside. I want to fade Arizona. Kevin Sumlin's done a bad job so far, and I don't think it gets better this year. They had several opt-outs for them, several starters. Colorado, first-year coach, hired very late in the process. I'm not even a big fan of Carl Durrell. It's certainly Arizona and Colorado, two teams I'm looking to go against. Although very intriguing to me is, even though I would say UCLA has got the highest upside, Colorado's the worst team. I got a huge overlay in that game this week where it says Colorado clearly is the play. So in game for me, no pre-flop. I think in normal circumstances, I'd be firing on Colorado, but right now, no pre-flop bet in that one.
Yeah, I got Colorado +2, and the market's at 6.5. So that's definitely an overlay here for me in this one. Not as big of an overlay as Stanford and Oregon, but you and I were much closer to the opening number. It's been all the action that's come in on Stanford that has driven us, driven our numbers away from what the market is. But overall here, just some overall, summation here of the Pac-12. One thing that really stands out to me is, of the Power 5 conferences, this is the weakest, I think, from a coaching standpoint. And I think the reason being is that, Mario Cristobal, I think, kind of changed my mind a little bit to a degree last year, but still not completely sold on him. Nobody's sold on Clay Helton. Everybody loves Kyle Whittingham. We all know that. Jimmy Lake was a good defensive coordinator. Does he translate to being a good head coach? We'll kind of wait and see. Wilcox is good. Edwards is good. I don't know how great of a head coach David Shaw is. And of course, the bottom half of this conference, not a whole lot of proven guys or just guys that we want to look to go against.
Great point. Yeah, no question about it. Of the Power 5, I don't think it's the weakest talent. I mean, there's some teams that are super talented, and Oregon's certainly recruiting at a very high level. But coaching leaves a lot to be desired. And I'll say, now that I live out here, it just doesn't. The SEC's got the motto, it just means more. I'm telling you, it don't mean much out here. At the Pac-12, it don't mean much. They can bitch, piss, and moan on how, East Coast bias and whatnot, and some of that's probably true to a certain extent. But, a lot of people ask me, how do they get better out here? You got to care. It's got to mean something. It's literally life and death in the SEC, where you and I are from the state of Ohio. Football is life. And it's just, that's not the attitude out here. And, it could be, depending on where you fall. Yeah, I'm not trying to make it politically, but just philosophically, life-wise, maybe that's a good thing. It's not life and death. But I'm telling you, if you want to compete against Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson, it better mean a hell of a lot more to compete nationally. So I think coaching, you're right. Very astute, sharp point by you. And I just think overall culture out here, not as good as what it is back in the East and the South.
Well, and lastly here, as far as I know, there will be no fans in any Pac-12 games. You can correct me if I'm wrong with that, but that's another thing, too, about this conference. We've got Colorado and Utah, obviously, in some form of elevation in Boulder and Salt Lake City, but, Tempe is a very hard place to play, very crazy fan base. Arizona State known as one of the best party schools in the country.
Yeah.
Well, that won't be a thing this year. Going up to Eugene, always a tough trip. Going up to Seattle and take on Washington can be tough. Pullman's tough to get to. Corvallis is tricky to get to, all that kind of thing. Not as much home field advantage here in this conference this year. So I kind of wonder how that dynamic's going to play out too.
Very good point. I will say that there are some really good atmospheres. And then, Arizona State, some of their home field, at least early on in the season, heat. I mean, It's 100 degrees. Now that you're starting in November, you don't have to worry about that as much. So, yeah, I'd certainly maybe more of a downgrade from a home field aspect than any other Power 5 conference, Big Ten as well, obviously. And then, they are playing, it just isn't this week. I think they have several of those 9 a.m. kickoffs in some of their bigger games. And to me, I think especially you got a bigger underdog and a 9 a.m. kickoff. I'm not looking to back a lot of big favorites in those games, starting with the SC Arizona State game.
Yeah. And, it's one of those things where, especially in week one, where you're just starting out, you've been on this practice schedule or something like that, but still, it's just been, everything's been weird about this year to begin with. And now you start by playing a 9 a.m. game and maybe play a few of those in a row. That's a very difficult thing. So I don't know. I feel like, to me, at the outset here, and I know you mentioned you've got several overlays in this conference this week already, I'm not going to feel super confident in the Pac-12, I don't think, for at least a few weeks here.
Yeah, and then the problem is, it's halfway through the season.
Right.
So, I normally I'd be, firing in bets left and right, but I'm going to take a wait and see with a lot of it. But yeah, I don't like nationally the aspect. Even if a team went 7-0 and ran the table, it's going to have to be a very dominating 7-0 for them to overcome the other, the ACC, the SEC, and, if Ohio State continues their path. To me, I would rather have like a Cincinnati. If Cincinnati continues to beat the best teams in the American by a significant margin, I'd take Cincy over anything I'd see out of the Pac-12. That's just a guess moving forward.
All right, let's run through a handful of games here for Week 10. And, we talked a little bit on Wednesday's show about the Wyoming-Colorado State game. Wyoming, 3.5, depending on where you look. Total up to 54.5 most places. But I want to talk about this Utah State-Nevada game because 2 weeks ago, Boise State was laying a number either smaller than this or similar to this, depending on where you look. Now Nevada's laying it against Utah State, 17.5, and even some of the squarer global shops out there have gone to 18 on this game. And the idea that in 2 weeks' time, Nevada can be a bigger favorite than Boise State against Utah State is just, it's crazy to me. And it got us talking before we started recording here about just the mindset of the market in general, and that maybe Utah State, a team that absolutely nobody wants to bet on, so this line can just be a runaway train and get to a place that, realistically, it probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest overlays of the week. And look, I've significantly downgraded Utah State, and I've upgraded Nevada. Nevada's look good. I don't think they've looked like the second coming. They've looked certainly very capable. And look, Utah State's been very bad, but they played Boise State and San Diego State, maybe the two best teams, and probably most likely the two best teams when it all shakes down in the conference. So, yeah, they got beat up by the two best teams. Seems like a huge overreaction to me. I'm not going to release it, but I'll have some small potatoes on Utah State. It's too big of an overlay for me, not for me personally, not to have a little bit of action on it.
Yeah, my line's 11 on this game. I don't know if I have the heart to bet Utah State, but this is another one where last week, the line for Nevada against UNLV just kept shooting up. And maybe people really love Nevada out there. Maybe there's somebody with a great amount of influence that loves the Wolfpack. I don't know, but I can't wrap my head around within a 2-week span, Nevada being a bigger favorite than Boise State in this matchup, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I got Boise and Nevada a pick 'em on a neutral or anything like that.
Oh,
In fact,
I'd have my biggest bet of my life on Boise.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not even close. So I don't know. I don't know if this is a commentary on the market and the amount of public money that's in it now, especially across the country here in the U.S. and of course, obviously globally. I don't know. But when I see something like this, it frustrates me. It pisses me off because the last thing that I want being an analyst in this business is something that I can't explain. And I can't explain how this line gets to this point when probably 2 weeks ago, if this is the first Mountain West game, it's what, Nevada -3, something like that?
Close. Maybe you could talk me into maybe it was 6. But I go back to that Boise State Nevada game, with that line right around there. I mean, I watched that game. I mean, maybe people aren't watching. I mean, yeah, Utah State didn't look good, but in the middle of the fourth quarter, it's a 28-13 game. I mean, with like 7-8 minutes left, it's 28-13. So it's not like they lost 49-0 in the game. So yeah, there's a lot of overlay this week that I'm not understanding. And what happened, briefly, I'm normally I'd be like, say F it, F the market. I mean, you got to respect the market, but I'd be like, I trust my power rankings. I'm having a really good college season. I'm just going to stick it to it. But then you had a conference start up last night, and I went 0-3 as far as big power ratings overlays. So as much as I disagree with the market, I'm going to be cautious because even the Mountain West is still only game 3, and there's still some things that you got to figure out as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and now the tough thing is, and you and I were talking about this off air, is this a higher than normal reactionary market because it's a COVID year and because it's just, we kind of look at it and say, okay, well, this team's played really well. We can trust them. There's obviously something wrong with the other team, COVID, all this craziness. I'm just betting this team I can trust. Or is this something that is a fundamental change now in the betting market to really react to what happens, to have these perception biases and these recency biases? And if it is, well, that's going to dictate how I update my power ratings week in and week out going forward. And the problem is I don't know, and I won't know until seeing what happens next season. So it's kind of frustrating, and I talked about this on Monday's show. I had some big power ratings overlays last week, and they all went in the shitter. The only one that looked really good was Texas, and that's just because they won a game they shouldn't have based on the box score. So I don't know, but again, it's one of those things that I have to figure out the answer to. And the problem is we may not know the answer until, 10 months from now.
Yeah, I don't think you are. I mean, I would say, if I had to guess, I would say it's more COVID than the market, at least at this point. But I do think the saturation of legalization and a lot more public money into it, it certainly plays a part. I don't think it's half of it. I think more than half is COVID, just because I've seen the COVID plays and the numbers just really run on some of this news. But the public also plays a part of that news, and they're betting into it. I would say this. If I'm giving you, and I would say you should be giving me advice, I'm going to give you some advice as far as some power ratings. I would be slow to be, adjusting your power ratings significantly. Let the market overreact. You stay steady, and I think you're going to come out ahead in the long term. Maybe you have more overlays next year, but I have a sneaky suspicion if it is the market overreacting on a weekly basis, you can fade that shit and make some money.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We'll have to see. I mean, I remember the games where I was off market that I lost. I don't remember the games where I was off market that I won. It's the true. It's the poker bad beats story. It's you always remember the bad beats. You can't remember the big hands that you won. You always remember the back door that you lost instead of the back door that you won. Stuff like that. So maybe it's just a perception bias on my end. I don't know, but it is something that will take a lot of work here in the off season. Once we get to it. But moving ahead to Friday's games here, you mentioned this. Well, actually, we haven't talked about this game at all yet so far this week. Miami and NC State. Miami laying doubles on the road, going to Raleigh. Total up to 59 for this one here. Any thoughts on this Miami and NC State game?
You know what? I got it 11. I think the number's about good here. I mean, I would say history for me would say I'd probably want to lean dog, but I mean, NC State's playing without Devin Leary, who's out for a significant portion. They've been outscored and outgained on the season. I have upgraded Miami significantly this year, but with that being said, they haven't wowed me in recent performances. Line looks about right. I didn't bet it. And again, I'm not afraid to, I mean, I bet 25 plays on Sunday, so I'm not afraid to fire in some numbers here. I just think that the number is pretty much on point.
I got this one 10, so you and I are both in the same place here. And one note I do want to make for listeners that maybe didn't listen to my solo show on Monday, I did upgrade my home field advantage across the board after that conversation that Brad and I had on last Thursday's show. I bumped everybody up a point pretty much, a few teams up a half a point. My base home field advantage now 2, which may still be low, but I just want to make that point.
I think you're good with 2. I think you're good with 2.
Okay. I just wanted to make that point because, again, we talked about it a lot on last week's show, and I had some time flying back from Portland over the weekend with my wife. So, I got to do some stuff on the plane coming back, and that was one of the things that I did, was upgrade my home field advantage a little bit. This Mountain West game on Friday night is all of a sudden very fascinating. San Jose State and San Diego State. San Diego State, 9.5, depending on where you look. Total 47.5. We talk about Nevada and we talk about Utah State. We talk about some of the impressive performances in this conference and some of the ones that have gone the other way. San Jose State looks pretty good right now. Again, you attach caveats to that, but Nick Starkel's got this offense moving the football.
Certainly did last week against New Mexico, although I think it might be more bad New Mexico than anything. New Mexico's really messed up as far as COVID, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to play against that a little bit. I lean San Diego State here. I got it at 10. I've been super impressed with them. Look, I wasn't a big fan of the Brady Hoke hire, but they've looked the part so far. Again, who have they played? Utah State, UNLV. I mean, I'm not sure we can get much about that, but they've looked a lot like what they've looked like the last 4 or 5 years. And I get San Jose State's won and covered both of their games, but Air Force moved the football against them. It just, that was kind of a fluky final there. So, and then with New Mexico being worse than what I expected, even though I like their head coaching hire, I think slight value here on the Aztecs. I haven't bet it yet, but 9.5 looks good to me. I did bet the under. I think San Jose State, their offense certainly is not going to have nearly as much success as what they did last week.
I think the most impressive thing for San Diego State here so far, I mean, we know they've got good defensive personnel. Brady Hoke was in the program last year. We knew that they'd probably be pretty solid on that side of the ball. Their running game has been terrific thus far. And Brady Hoke is a guy that, does have a background as an offensive line coach. And, maybe they've found a running back now, somebody kind of to, refill that pipeline where they had, Donnell Pumphrey and some of the other guys that they had go through that program, Juwan Washington. Maybe they've got, another one of those guys cut from that same cloth now. And the thing about San Jose State is they've got to pass the ball to be effective. They've got an excellent receiver there in Bailey Gaither. They've got Nick Starkel now, the SEC transfer. But if you go 3 and out a couple of times, you're probably not getting the ball back for like 6-7 minutes playing San Diego State. So I agree with your thought process on the under there. You're seeing some 48s pop in the marketplace right now. And I also agree that, a game like this forces San Jose State to be really efficient offensively. If you don't believe they can do that, then you probably look at the 9 or 9.5 on the favorite side. My line's 10, but I think that, both of us are kind of in a similar mindset here with this breakdown.
Yeah, it's certainly a lean. It's not a big bet for me, but if looking at the board right now, it's probably San Diego State minus 9.5 would be my favorite play on Friday night.
Now, we did a highlight video on Wednesday's show of ATS Radio for this game, BYU and Boise State. Big game, so I do want to get Brad's thoughts here on this matchup. BYU minus 3, total 61 here. BYU's covered 6 of the last 8 head-to-head meetings. This is one in a favorite role, though, for them. What do you think about this matchup?
So I bet BYU +1 circa opener. I'm happy with that one. At this position right now, though, I'm probably looking to play. I'm hoping it goes to 3.5. I'm looking to play back a little bit on Boise State. Not sure if you guys talked about this. BYU's in a weird spot this week. Obviously, already a short week, 1 day less on a travel week with this game being on Friday. But they never practice on Sunday because of religious beliefs. And then very unique to this season, Nobody in college football practiced on Tuesday with the election. So I got a BYU team that didn't practice a couple of days on a short week. I'm interested in taking Boise State only at plus 3.5. And obviously, to me, I'm a big historical outlier type of guy. And I mean, Boise State's been a home underdog once in the last 15 years. Once. And they outright upset Fresno a couple of years ago. This is the second time in the last 15 years they're home dogs. So 3.5 would be a play, not a big bet, but certainly a bet for me on the Broncos.
Well, and one of the things that we did talk about on that video is, BYU is just stepping up in class in a big way here. I mean, Boise State is a quality team, whether it's Bachmeier or Sears at quarterback. You look back at BYU's games here. If we ran back BYU at Navy, they're easily a double-digit favorite in that game. That one was, minus 1.5 or so. So, we thought Navy would be better. They're clearly not. That would be a double-digit line. Troy was 2 touchdowns. La Tech was 24. UTSA was 34. If we ran back the Houston game, they'd probably be doubles on the road there again, even though that one was 3. 29 at home against Texas State, over 30 at home against Western Kentucky. They've played a very weak schedule to this point. And now they're playing a Boise State team that, while Boise hasn't really played any big data points themselves, they're a very solid, perennially, they're a solid football team. So that's what I want to see here. I want to see how BYU looks against somebody who's more comparable to them. And, my line in this game is in that BYU minus 3 range. So I don't know if I'm going to have a full game play, but I kind of like Boise State first half just to see how BYU reacts to playing somebody closer to or maybe even on their level.
Ooh, I like that. I liked what they responded against Houston. In the second half, they trailed by 12 and they ran them out.
But maybe that's more fuel for my argument. They played a Houston team that was decent in the first half, didn't look good for BYU.
Mm-hmm. Good point. All right. Yeah, I could certainly see that. Yeah, Boise first half. All right.
That's the thing. And I think it's tough to kind of evaluate that because at the same time, while BYU hasn't played anybody, they've also played up to or exceeded expectations. I mean, all you can do is play who's in front of you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but they're 5-1-1 against the spread, and they're crushing teams. Yep.
Yeah, if you beat the hell out of teams you're supposed to beat the hell out of, well, should I hold your strength of schedule against you because you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do?
And who is Boise State played? So, this works both ways. I mean, they played 2 games, and I don't think much of Air Force this year. Certainly not the same team as what they were a year ago. And then they're playing Utah State, which the market hates. So who has Boise State played? They're stepping up as well.
No, it's an excellent point. Definitely an excellent point there. And as we get to some of these Saturday games here, we'll kind of bounce around the card a little bit. We'll do a couple of highlight videos along the way here. But I do want to ask you about this North Carolina and Duke game 335, 336, noon kickoff here in Durham. North Carolina up to 11.5. And in fact, we saw a little bit of North Carolina money here on Thursday morning. Total 63 for this game. Big rivalry game. Obviously, we think about the basketball rivalry more than anything else with North Carolina and Duke. But still, it's not like these two teams like each other very much.
No. Two teams I kind of probably want to play on. They're just maddeningly inconsistent. I'll start with North Carolina. At some points, they look really good offensively, like one of the best offenses in the country. And then they just aren't putting it completely together. Maybe we should expect that in year 2 under Mac Brown. And last week was obviously disappointing. Duke, it's all about turnovers with them. If they play relatively clean, I think they're much better than what the market has them at. But again, I got it at 12. No play for me. No pre-flop bet. I thought one of the more intriguing box scores that I've seen all season was that Duke Charlotte game, where they only had the ball for less than 20 minutes, but they averaged about 8 yards per play, and they ran the football. Duke did more often than they passed it. So. 2 teams I want to play on facing each other, and I'll just see how it works out this week.
Yeah, I got this one 11. I'd have to take North Carolina, if anything, just because if Duke turns it over, North Carolina is probably going to score. Their offense is incredible still. Their defense has been the problem this year. Their offense is still very, very good. Sam Howell is excellent. I love their coordinators. I think Mac Brown does the job that he was hired to do. David Cutcliffe's an excellent head coach, but there's only so much you can do when you can't take care of the football. So If they turn it over, I think North Carolina turns it into points. So it'd be North Carolina or nothing. And maybe that's the reaction behind the line move here for this one. What about the next game on the board? 339, 340 as we go to the Big Ten here. Michigan and Indiana. Michigan 3-point road favorite, total 54, 54.5 for this one. I know that you're kind of a historical guy when it comes to looking at a lot of this stuff. And the fact of the matter is Indiana has had next to no success playing against Michigan.
I mean, yeah, Michigan's beaten Indiana 24 straight times. Michigan's favored in all 24 of those, so give them credit for taking care of business, something they didn't obviously do last week against Sparty and their, one of their rivals. But what I found most interesting is, going back to the records, going back to 1980, this is the shortest spread ever for Michigan against Indiana. And I couldn't find anything less than 6 as far as spreads. Is Michigan historically bad? No. I mean, they obviously didn't look good last week. Is Indiana historically good? It's one of their better teams that they've had, but I haven't been overwhelmed with Indiana, even though they're 2-0 for the first time in Big Ten play since, I think, 1991. Penn State game, very misleading. And then I had a huge bet on Indiana last week, and I wasn't overwhelmed with that game. Indiana was +3 turnovers. So even though it's not a big overlay in my power ratings, I like the spot here for Michigan. I like the historical spot here. Wolverines will be a bet for me at -3.
Yeah, I like this one too. I got it 4.5. So, I mean, it's not like I'm crossing key numbers or anything crazy like that. But, I think that when you look at this matchup in particular, Michigan's better than they played last week. Joe Milton moved the football. They had some very questionable play calling decisions. They had some things that just kind of didn't really work out in their favor. And that's the big thing. It's, oh my God, they lost as a 3-touchdown favorite, and all that kind of thing. Bigger than a 3-touchdown favorite. And it's like, you know what? Okay, shit happens, especially in college football. Indiana has had 2 really bad offensive performances, and they found a way to win both of those games and found a way to cover last week, against all odds. So, to me, I just sort of look at this one and I say, I agree with you. I think Michigan is cheaply priced here. I think if I find a flat 3 or something better than a flat 3, I will go ahead and take the Wolverines in this game.
Be interested to see where the money comes here. If it I'm thinking it's going to stay at 3, but a lot of money showed up against Michigan on Friday with Michigan State, which was surprising. And you'd have to consider it sharp considering how bad Michigan State looked the week prior. But be interested to see where this goes. Indiana was that line last week against Rutgers was all over the board. So, man, I'd like to hold out for a 2.5, but I hate to wait too long where it goes to 3.5. I'm just, three's still a good bet for me, but obviously around a key number, you want to take a better position.
Like I said, I'd like to get it flat. Maybe if Indiana takes money, I can get -3, -0.5, something like that. That's kind of what I'm waiting for. I'm not.
What's your take? I think it closes right around 3. I'd be very surprised it moves off of 3. If it moves off 3, I think it goes to 3.5.
Yeah, I think it sits 3. I do. Okay. Maybe 3 -15, 3 -20 at some of the public shops, something like that. But people had a very high perception of Indiana coming into the season, and they were kind of low on Michigan. So I'd be surprised if we go to 3.5 here with Michigan off of, such a noteworthy loss, and with Indiana off of, they did what they were supposed to do, I guess, last week, even though it wasn't super pretty. I do want to ask you about this game because I kind of like this game. I haven't played it as of yet, a game where I do have a pretty significant overlay, but I'm sort of waiting to see if I can get 14 at a pretty good number here. Baylor and Iowa State. I've got this game 9.5, and I guess I've been a little bit low on Iowa State over the course of the season, but totals come down 4 points to 47.5. Matt Campbell's a great dog coach. I don't want to lay big numbers with Iowa State. I want to bet Baylor here. I just don't know if maybe I've accurately rated how far Baylor's fallen this season.
Yeah, I got 11.5. I'm just 14.5, certainly. I'll agree with you there. Maybe pizza bet for me on Baylor. I mean, I had a huge overlay in their game last week against TCU. and it was 30-0 TCU, and I don't like TCU much this year. I mean, that's what Baylor trailed last week at one point, 30-0. Just new coach, inexperienced defense, some chemistry issues, possibly a running back. Maybe a couple of their top backs aren't happy. But you're right. Iowa State laying big numbers, not great, even though they covered a big number last week. They had to fight, claw, and scratch and get some late scoring to cover that against Kansas. Yeah, Baylor, nothing for me. Small potatoes, though, on the Bears.
All right, fair enough. We've talked a lot about the Pac-12 already, so I guess we can kind of skip over most of the games that we discussed there in that conference. We'll do a couple of highlight videos in a second on Florida, Georgia, and then I guess we'll add Clemson, Notre Dame, since we already talked about the Pac-12. But I want to ask you about this West Virginia-Texas game. You know, last week I had Texas. I said Texas should have been favored on the road and Stillwater. They win the game, but God, the box score was just very, very ugly in that one for the Longhorns. Now they take on a West Virginia team that I think is pretty damn good. Texas laying 6.5 here, 55 the total. What do you think about that one?
So I got it at 8, but I understand the move, and I really think West Virginia is the sharp side. It's just I bet a couple West Virginia games already this year. They're just not consistent. I mean, when they are consistent, I mean, they're a very impressive team, and then you know, you add in the fact that Texas is off. There's no question about it. That was the most misleading game of last week, was the Texas-Oklahoma State game as far as a box score. West Virginia is probably off their most complete game. Even their head coach said it after the game, Neil Brown, who I really like. He said it was the most complete game he's had in the 2 years he's been there at West Virginia. I agree with the early money. I just right now I'm not feeling like taking 6.5 when 7 was available for about a day earlier this week.
One thing I like to talk about, and I do a couple of sharp money articles over at ATS.io on Fridays. Sometimes it's the line move that doesn't happen that stands out. And when I look at this game and I see a total of 55, and I know that West Virginia defensively has been excellent this year. Texas's metrics look a lot better than their actual performance for the most part. I would have expected money to come in on the under for this game, under 55. There's a few stray 54.5s out there in the market, but nothing of great significance. And again, the line moves that don't happen sometimes say a lot. I'm surprised not to see this total coming down, and it makes me wonder, sort of how the game flow and how the game state plays out.
I got a theory on it. I think a lot of it's public perception, because if you just do scoring averages, and I had a lot of people hit me up on Twitter already this week, West Virginia, Texas over is the play. I agree with you. I think you could throw, Texas had 3 overtime games already this year. A lot of extra scoring that should not be among your power ratings if you're doing totals work. But I've had more than a few people hit me up wanting to bet the over. And I think that's certainly occurring among the public. And I think maybe that's what's having to say here why the line hasn't dropped more.
And I'm not going to sit here and say that West Virginia's defense is as good as Oklahoma State's. I think it's in the same zip code. But Texas last week, kick return touchdown, 3 scoring drives of 15 yards or fewer. They should have had virtually no points in that game last week. Yep. So, to me, maybe Ellinger, maybe there's something misfiring with this offense. I don't know. I like the under in that game. And I don't know if the line's going to go up or not, but I do like the under in that West Virginia and Texas game there. All right, so with that, we'll do a highlight video here. 4-game, 381, 382, Florida and Georgia neutral site game in Jacksonville. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party, a little bit subdued here this year with COVID-19. What is not subdued here this week is the love for Florida in the betting market. This one was 4.5, 5 earlier in the week, now down to 3, 3.5. Total has also fallen a little bit to 52.5. And professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers joins me on today's show. And Brad, do you agree with the money and the movement here on Florida?
I do. I am part of the Florida love. I really loved them on that circa opener +6, but I think the move is correct in this instance on 2 fronts. First one, Georgia is really banged up on defense. Defense carries Georgia. They're going to have 4 starters out, including, Richard LeCounte is their quarterback of their back end. 4-year starter. He's a senior. He had an accident off the field. After last week's game, he's going to be out with a couple other guys up front for them. So Georgia's defense probably not as good, at least what they, are when they're healthy. That's a major negative for me on Georgia. And probably the biggest reason why I bet Florida here is college football more and more is becoming about offense and quarterback play. Don't believe me? Ask Nick Saban after he played Georgia, and a lot of people, including myself, think Georgia has the best defense in the country. He said, hey, look, I'm a defensive guy, but offense wins these big games. A great offense is going to beat a great defense in today's day and age in college football. And I think Florida has a great offense with Kyle Pitts Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts, the outstanding tight end for them. And then also Kadarius Toney, who's, kind of like a Percy Harvin type for them. I mean, those three guys right there, better than anything Georgia has. And to me, Georgia there's a reason why Stetson Bennett was the fourth string on the depth chart earlier this year. I mean, 0 touchdowns, 5 picks his last couple of games. I just don't think he can go score for score with Kyle Trask. So Gators for me. Although I obviously don't like it as much at 3 like I did earlier in the week.
Yeah, but I mean, at 3.5, and there are still some 3.5s out there with reason.
Take the hook.
I think it makes sense. And another thing, you know what? Hell, you could just outright play the money line here in this game too. I think that, Florida has a very good chance of winning this matchup for all the reasons that you outlined. And furthermore, too, a couple of different points here. Florida's got a ton of talent on defense. And I know their defense is underachieved to this point in time, but how long does that continue being a thing? Especially against the Georgia offense that's not super efficient, not moving up and down the field on a whole lot of teams. Maybe Florida's defense plays up a little bit in this game. And also, too, Dan Mullen last week for Florida. I mean, Florida's gone through a lot. Mullen comes out and says, I want the place full. A day later, they get a bunch of COVID cases. Mullen had to put his foot in his mouth a little bit. Last week, I mean, he was there for his team. And the players respond to that kind of thing, man. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, Kirby Smart doesn't have his team or anything like that. But now all of a sudden, if you're Florida, you sit there and say, we've gone through some rough seas. We've gotten through some things. This dude's got our back. And now we're playing this big marquee game. Teams tend to respond in those situations. And I think Florida responds here in a big way.
I'm glad you brought that up. That'd probably be my third reason why I like Florida. I like a little bit of their mojo this week. And, I go back to this game specifically. I remember several years ago, dating myself now, but when Mark Richt was there against Urban Meyer, obviously Mark Richt consistently didn't have much success. But one year that he did, Georgia scored an early touchdown. The whole team comes onto the field, celebrates. They take the 15-yard penalty and celebrate it. Georgia goes on to win that game. It was just psychological for them. And I think Florida, who has struggled against Georgia here as of late, I think what happened last week should give them an extra boost. I think Florida's certainly the side, and that's why I bet them.
Well, there you go. There's a consensus opinion from us here on ATS Radio. Make sure you subscribe to our full ATS Radio broadcasts, which you can find on Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, wherever you stream and download your podcast content. All right, we'll break up the highlight videos for a second here. We'll get back to one with Clemson and Notre Dame in a minute. But I wanted to ask you about $399, $400 as I wear my South Carolina Gamecock shirt today. Texas A&M and South Carolina, the Aggies laying 10 on the road, total 59 or 58.5 for this one in Columbia at Williams-Brice. What do you think about Jimbo laying doubles on the road here?
I got an overlay. I got up more in the 7 range. And look, Texas A&M looks like a team to keep an eye on. They're going to be favored maybe in all of their remaining games. The only question mark being a road trip to Auburn. Their offensive line's playing at an elite level. They haven't allowed a sack in 4 games. Kellen Mond's playing well. But that being said, I mean, looks steep to me, the line. South Carolina's fresh off a bye. I think the market probably overreacted to them getting blown out against LSU a couple of weeks ago. The market certainly overreacted that game with LSU last week. We saw how they ended up coming back and playing against Auburn. They've already upset Auburn at home, competed well against Tennessee and Florida. Gamecocks plus 10. What's your take?
Yeah, I got a little bit of an overlay here too. I got this one 6.5, and I did upgrade Texas A&M, off of last week's performance. And I had some people say something to me on Twitter about how I talked about Texas A&M's offensive line not being very good, and maybe I should clarify that Texas A&M's offensive line gets pushed around in big games, which is the point that I was trying to make. And it's been a hallmark under Jimbo Fisher, even going back to his Florida State days. This is not a spot where they should be overwhelmed on the offensive line. They should be able to push South Carolina around a little bit. And it's the reason why, despite having an overlay, I'm not going to take the Gamecocks here in this game. I sort of wonder what the state of the Gamecocks program is. And I wonder about this nationally with a lot of teams here as we go forward. Will these teams make coaching changes with all this COVID stuff that's going on? I think we've gotten to a point where South Carolina has really flatlined with Will Muschamp. I think that they no longer have a very high ceiling. And for South Carolina, they spent, 20 years not having much of a ceiling. Then Spurrier got some quarterbacks like a Connor Shaw and stuff like that, and they got a whole lot better. I don't know what the state of the program is. It almost feels like it feels like Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. Everything just kind of feels the same week in and week out with Muschamp. I don't know if off a bye is effective for South Carolina. I don't know if they've got the talent to play with Texas A&M. If they show up here and play well in this game, I don't know how much it changes my thought process about the Gamecocks going forward. So as somebody who follows the program pretty closely, I just wonder if things have just gotten very stale there in Columbia. And it makes me worry about games like this where they are taking on a team that's clearly better than they are.
Also doesn't help that in state, you got top 2 program in Clemson. That takes some juice out of your program. When upstate, they're in Clemson. They're rocking and rolling. I'm not sure South Carolina is good enough as a state. Keep in mind, at the downfall there of the Spurriers, kind of when Dabo and company took off, it was Spurrier who owned Dabo early on. It's just, somebody's got to not be as good in a state like that.
And I'll never forget the story that I heard. And I will tell you, I heard it from somebody. It's secondhand. I don't know if it's completely legitimate or not. So maybe I shouldn't even say anything here on the show, and I'm going to anyway. I heard a story that Nick Chubb was coming for his official visit to South Carolina, and Steve Spurrier went golfing instead. And this was, of course, at the tail end of his tenure there in Columbia. And it was sort of just like Spurrier at that point in time, whether it was his age or something else that just kind of checked out a little bit. And Chubb was kind of like, okay, well, F you, I'm going to Georgia then. And, really ever since Spurrier wasn't as engaged, I know they pulled a couple of big recruits out of the state and stuff like that. They got, of course, like guys like Marshawn Lloyd and all that, but I don't know, just the pipeline. I'm not going to say it's dried up, but it's just not as rich of a resource as it was. And I think in a game like this against a team like Texas A&M, you kind of need those rich resources. And to me, it sort of feels like South Carolina doesn't really have them right now. And I'm hoping for the best here in this game. But, even as a South Carolina fan, I will probably find myself watching Clemson Notre Dame instead.
Yeah, I got a sneaky suspicion, though, South Carolina and Texas A&M might be a more competitive game than Clemson Notre Dame.
Ooh, all right. Well, with that little teaser here, let's do a highlight video of game 401-402, the marquee matchup in college football for this weekend. Clemson and Notre Dame. Clemson, 5.5-point favorite. That's the prevailing number market-wide. Total in this game of 52. And despite your play like a champion hat that you have on today, sounds like you've got a take on this Clemson-Notre Dame matchup.
Yeah, I like Clemson here. Bet them earlier in the week. It'll be very interesting to see where this line shapes up, because right now you're in a dead range at 5.5. And so we'll see. I like Clemson for a multitude of reasons. Number one, I'm not as down, I think, on the market on their true freshman quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei. I think he's perfectly capable. I'll go so far that despite his inexperience, if you were to ask me, who would you rather have moving forward for this season, 2020? I'm not talking, as a program the next 3 years, but just for this season, I'd rather have DJ Uiagalelei than Ian Book, his counterpart at Notre Dame. So that's mispricing number one. Mispricing number two for me is I love the matchup of, everyone talks about coaching matchups and whatnot, but they're usually talking head coaches. I love the coordinator matchup for Clemson. Brent Venables, one of the best to do it in college football the last 2 decades, against a 28-year-old Tommy Rees in his first year as a coordinator. I'm talking not just at Notre Dame, first year as a coordinator ever at Notre Dame. Significant advantage for me there with Brent Venables and Clemson. Third mispricing for me. Notre Dame hasn't played anybody. They played one team in my top 40. It's actually the number 40 team, Louisville. We saw how that game went down. They almost lost outright. So they haven't played anybody. Major step up in class here for the Irish. And then finally, I mean, even though I'm a fan, I think, and a lot of people think I'm anti and negative about Notre Dame. Well, it's because they never show up in big games. I mean, never. Against teams that finish in the top 10, Notre Dame's 4-40 since 1994. I mean, that's something you'd expect from Purdue or Indiana, not the Fighting Irish. 4-40 straight up. And a lot of you are going to say, well, they're an underdog in most of those games. They're expected to lose. Well, against the spread, they fall short by 8 points per game in those 44 games. 8 points per game. They're falling short of expectation. Add that up, buddy. And that's why I laid, a couple grand on Clemson, -4. Still like it, -5, 5.5.
Well, all right. I don't know if I can really add too much to that. I mean, I guess one thing I could add is that, when you start talking about game state and game flow and stuff like that, Notre Dame is the type of team that can play from in front against a lot of ACC teams, against a lot of the teams that are generally on their schedule, because they can just kind of lean on them, use that running game, 3-4 yards per carry, something like that. Just kind of methodically move down the field, kind of keep the other team at bay. You can't do that against Clemson. I mean, this Clemson defense, despite heavy losses, 3-4 years in a row, they're still an elite level defense. They always will be. As long as Brent Venables is there, as long as Dabo Swinney's still got that recruiting pipeline there, Notre Dame doesn't do anything flashy. They don't do anything super fun. When you think about the teams that, have competed against Alabama, for example, it's a team like Texas A&M with Johnny Manziel that can improvise and can, make broken plays turn into something. A team like Ole Miss with Hugh Freeze and all the recruits that he was able to bring in. And also just, just athletes that went out there and made plays. Notre Dame's recruiting is fine, but they don't get the same level of athletes that teams that have a chance to beat elite teams get. And that's the problem here in this one, is that Clemson is just better across the field in every single area. And it just is what it is. And also, one other thing that I think works in Clemson's favor is that if it was Trevor Lawrence, you know what Trevor Lawrence is going to do. You've seen it for 3 years. It's very easy to kind of prep for that Trevor Lawrence offense. They have a much different dynamic now without Trevor Lawrence. And we saw last week, ETN used a ton as a receiver. We saw ETN get a bunch of touches in that game. I don't think Notre Dame can stop Travis Etienne. So, when you look at this matchup here, I think there's so much in Clemson's favor. This line is cheap because Trevor Lawrence is out. Again, if Trevor Lawrence is in there, this line's 13? I think is what you and I both had it when we talked about this game last week. It's Clemson. It's got to be.
Yeah, and, I'll say this. Travis Etienne, this is the game right here where Travis Etienne coming back probably won him the game. If he should have left, I mean, kudos for him for wanting to come back and play his senior year. But I would have major concerns for Clemson offensively if he wasn't there. But I just think he's the best. He's one of the best running backs I've ever seen, especially when you consider what he can do out of the backfield, catching the ball. And one final thing for me here, and this is kind of the rubber stamp. It's November. It's at night. It's South Bend. I had season tickets there for 20 years. I know what it can be once that wind comes off Lake Michigan sometimes there. But guess what? Temperatures Saturday, 70 degrees on November. So Clemson doesn't have to worry about, 35-degree temps and some wind blowing or whatnot. Going to be some good conditions. And usually when there's good conditions, the best team's going to win.
Well, and furthermore here too, something we've talked about, and we've seen it in the NFL where away teams have outscored home teams. We've talked about this in various places on the show here. But, if you had DJ in his second start going to a raucous and rowdy South Bend environment, that's one thing. Right now, you don't. You have such a subdued atmosphere in so many of these venues that, he's going to be able to call out plays at the line. He's going to be able to do a lot of things on third down. They're not going to get those false starts. They're not going to get those miscommunications that you might see in a traditional college football year. The game's probably not going to speed up on him as much as a second game starter as it probably would have last year or any other year in college football. So I think that benefits Clemson here too.
Another great point. Would have been one of the best atmospheres, although I'll say this. I would have fully expected to see 30,000 Clemson fans in the stands. With it being their first trip there, they would have bought a lot of tickets from Notre Dame fans who are like myself, that grown apathetic towards the program and wouldn't mind making a buck or two. And that, I made my buck or two betting on Clemson.
Well, there you go. There's a consensus opinion from us here on Clemson and Notre Dame from ATS Radio. Make sure you subscribe to the full editions of ATS Radio, which you can find on Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, wherever you stream and download your podcast content. All right, with that, because I don't think either one of us wants to talk about UMass and Marshall, we'll transition over.
I got an overlay. I bet UMass, believe it or not.
Oh God. I mean, I do too. My line's 37.5, but you can't. I can't. I can't. How big is your overlay that you made that play?
I think like 6 points. So
five,
a little more than 5. So
you're a better man than I. All right. Anyway, we'll go over to the NFL where we don't see any UMass versus Marshall type games. Well, I guess we could say Jets and Chiefs last week was sort of in the same ballpark. This Thursday night game for the day of, listeners, Green Bay and San Francisco, train wreck, shit show of a game, bunch of guys out on both sides, COVID, injuries, everything else. Did you bet anything in this game? I mean, are you even going to follow this game?
Maybe under. I mean, hell, I don't know. It's going to be, you would think it's kind of like a preseason game, but, and I already, and this was data, more towards last season, but, historically speaking, Levi Stadium is kind of like more of an under just because of the surface and whatnot. So if you had to play it, I'm not going to lay 7 with Green Bay. Although, I mean, if you really needed to play a side, I guess I'd lay it with the Packers. I guess. I'm talking like Totino's Pizza. If you want a little upgrade, maybe a family restaurant type pizza, maybe under for me. That's it. Nothing big.
I will say this. There's going to be a lot of Green Bay teasers in the market this week. So there
Makes
will be
a hell of a lot of sense.
What, Green Bay and Houston, probably?
Green Bay. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Green Bay, Houston. Maybe people taking Tennessee as a pick. It's not a perfect Wong teaser. You're not going through 3 and 7, but maybe people will take Tennessee as a pick. I don't know. This NFL cards, it's weird because you've got several games that appear like they should be competitive. Seattle, Buffalo, close number. Denver and Atlanta, those two teams are very Jekyll and Hyde, but the line is 4. Detroit, Minnesota was 4 until Stafford got put on the COVID list. Now that one's off the board. Baltimore, Indy, interesting to see some Indianapolis money coming in today a little bit. That's looking like a pretty competitive game. Giants and Washington will be a pillow fight. Vegas and the Chargers looks competitive. Miami, Arizona, New Orleans, Tampa Bay could be competitive. But at the same time, like, I don't know if there are a lot of sides I like in any of those games because close lines, but largely inconsistent teams.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling this year, and you hear me talk about wins. I'm not afraid. I probably talk way more than I should about losers. I don't lose as much as like I talk about on social media.
You're just self-deprecating, like all of us.
But I mean, I'm just gonna say I'm having my worst NFL season ever. I've never had a losing season, and I'm struggling. I mean, it's only half over, but I mean, I got an uphill battle to pull out a winning season this year. And maybe I'm just not seeing things, or maybe I can just strike it up to I've had some more often than not some poor luck, but some of it's just been COVID. It's messed me up on a few games. I liked one side a lot this week, and it seems like there's going to be some pushback in the market, but I really like Arizona against Miami. And that's probably by far my favorite bet. If I was only making one bet, and if you told me you only got to make one bet this week, it's Arizona. I like them coming off a bye. There hasn't been anything phony about them, I think, this season. I mean, I've generally been impressed now. This is 2 years. They've exceeded my expectations, both Cliff Kingsbury and the quarterback there, Kyler Murray. And I guess my mispricing is this. I'm not buying Tua. I'm not buying a Miami team that got outgained by 300 yards last week and somehow won by double digits. to me, historically speaking, that is to fade that team the next week has been profitable for me for years, 6-7 years. Playing games like this. So give me the Cardinals.
Yeah, initially I thought I was going to have a position on that game, initially, especially looking at the box score from last week with Miami game. Also, too, Miami, they didn't have to show a whole lot with Tua because they had, those weird scores and all that kind of thing. So maybe there's some element of unknown. I don't know if Tua's an NFL quarterback. I know what he did at Alabama, but also I know what Mac Jones is doing at Alabama.
He's doing it just as well with less talent around him than Tua had. And Mac Jones, was a 3-star guy. Come on.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what Tua is. I know Miami's defense is really good. And maybe that's enough to keep me off of this game. I also think it's a weird spot traveling to Arizona and, all that kind of thing. Look, when I look up and down the card, I know you like Baltimore. I like Baltimore too. I think that, Baltimore is there are problems with the Baltimore Ravens. I get it. I fully understand that. We saw that on display last week again. But to me, Indianapolis, I don't trust Phillip Rivers in any close game. I certainly don't trust Phillip Rivers in a close game against Lamar Jackson. And yeah, the Indianapolis defense is great. Find me a Lamar Jackson they've faced this year. Find me any, above average quarterback they've faced this year. You may find one or two. You're not going to find a whole lot of them. So I do like Baltimore here this week. I think this is kind of a backs against the wall type of game for Baltimore. Maybe rally and gel a little bit because they've got some defensive worries with COVID now with Marlon Humphrey and all that kind of thing. But otherwise, just kind of bouncing around the board here. Look, Vegas and the Chargers, right? Seems like a good place to take the Chargers to me. I know that there could be some hangover off of last week's loss. That's a possibility. But the fact of the matter is they look like a legitimate offense with Justin Herbert. They've changed some of their play calling on early downs. They've been throwing more. They put themselves in more favorable positions. The problem I have is I think the Raiders are pretty good. I think Derek Carr does what he does in this offense very well. I think John Gruden's a good head coach. And I do not like Anthony Lynn. So I think the Chargers are in a good spot. That's a toss-up type of game in the pick'em range. Do I want to bet Anthony Lynn against John Gruden, though? I don't know.
Yeah, I think I am going to talk myself into it. I'll bet them in that game just because you just can't pass on a week.
No, that's true.
So, and a lot of times you have only one pick, and that's where, to me, me betting personally, I probably could do it just because I'm so heavily involved on the college side. But, I do run a service. I do sell information. So, I need to have more than one NFL pick. So, for me, yeah, I'm probably going to talk myself into the Chargers. Going back to the other game that you talked about, I didn't even realize this. And I'm glad you brought it up. And that's why I love doing this show among, other things, a lot of things I love doing this spot. But I'm running through Indianapolis' schedule. You're right. Who in the hell have they played? Jacksonville, Minnesota, the Jets, the Bears, the Browns. I don't think much of Baker Mayfield, and they did lose that game by 9. The Bengals and the Lions. Oh, my God. Yeah, they're taking a major step up here. I know the market's against me because some money's pouring in a little bit on Indy, but wow, they haven't played anybody.
No, they haven't. Last week
they played one legit team and got beat by the Browns. And I don't even think the Browns are legit.
No, and Detroit, they've got all sorts of problems they played last week. Indianapolis was off of a bye. I think Frank Reich's an excellent head coach. That's about the only thing I kind of worry about in this Baltimore game this week, but he's not better than Harbaugh. So
no, he's not.
I do like Baltimore in that one there. And I think, and this is a discussion that we would have to go way in depth on another day. But, when I look around the NFL, and there are so many of these games, not just spreads, but games in general, that come down to the fourth quarter. And there are a lot of coaches in this league that have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
They do not understand time management. They do not understand timeouts. I have Sean Payton should know better. And to see what Sean Payton did in that game last week against the Bears on Sunday Night Football, just unfathomable what he did in that end game situation there. And
I had the Saints.
And even I had the Saints too in the circa. And even with guys that should know better, they just seemingly don't. And in the NFL here, what is the magic formula? I've talked a lot about, well, take the better team, take the better quarterback, and then I have not followed through with it. And I've had listeners like, yeah, like the Kansas City Denver game. Yeah, Drew Lock and Vic Fangio, obviously,
Yeah.
quarterback. And it's like, look, is it better coach, better quarterback? Is it line value? Is it, or at least what you perceive to be line value? Is it the differences in coaches in this league? Are we all just throwing shit at the wall every week and hoping it sticks? I don't know, man. Even the coaches that seem like they should be trustworthy make these weird decisions that just don't make any sense. And the NFL every week is a struggle for me. And I know it's a struggle for a lot of people because we all call it a tight, efficient market. It's not even a struggle for me looking at the lines. It's a struggle for me of what the hell is this team? Who the hell is this coach? Every week. It's hard to put together a 5-play card for the Circa. I will tell you that.
Yeah, heck yeah, it is. I mean, some of it. I mean, it's no excuses here, but I mean, some of it might be just COVID. But I'm struggling as well, and you would think I would learn my lesson. What's the one stable thing going right now? I would say I think your coach quarterback thing makes a lot of sense. I mean, Seattle's good straight up and against the spread, although I think they're overrated a little bit. Pittsburgh quarterback, although he's aging, that's even a thing. You can always punch holes in almost every team. The one team that's really consistent at quarterback and coach, Kansas City, that continues to win and also continues to cover even big numbers. Guess what I did? I faded them this week. I took Carolina. So I don't know. Sometimes maybe paralysis by overanalysis.
Yeah, I mean, I like Carolina a little bit too. And, and the funny thing is I kind of said, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, I'm like, look, I'm probably going to fade Carolina the game Christian McCaffrey comes back, simply because they're going to put too much of their offensive game plan into Christian McCaffrey. And they're going to, limit themselves on what they can do, how they can vary stuff up, things like that. And they're in this situation against Kansas City. And I'm like, well, shit, I got a good coach, a defense that plays hard, a Kansas City team that I don't know if they're invested. Maybe they're looking ahead to the bye next week. They play 4 or 5 games on the road coming out of the bye. So maybe they don't care that much this week. And then they're going to go out there and win 38 to, 15 or 14. And I'm going to go, I guess they cared this week. I don't know. Is it, do you put so much into the situational angles and the intangible angles, or should you just look at the tangible and say, you know what, this team's good. They're well coached. Their quarterback's good. They take care of the football. I'll just pay the premium. God, I don't know.
You paid a premium on New England all these years, and from a historical aspect, I mean, they did something for 20 years that should be physically and humanly impossible in a very efficient NFL market. I think, part of my struggle is too, they were always when I'm in a hole and maybe I have a bad couple of weeks, the team that would pull me out of it would be the Patriots. And I don't have that, you phone a friend anymore. I don't have that jail out of free card betting on the Patriots. I bet on them a couple times, and they've come up short, and they've disappointed me greatly. I think that's part of a little bit of my personal problem with the NFL this year.
And I think it's that mental block of, we both know that this market is efficient. We both know that by the time these games go off on Sunday, in theory, the line is exactly where it should be. All the value has been extracted from either side, both spread and total. And I think one of my problems is, and I used to play a lot of poker, and God, I wish I still could because I really miss it, but you always tried to make that hero call. You had king high, and you're sitting there thinking, this guy's straight bluffing. I'm going to make this hero call. Everyone at the table is going to go, wow, and then you make that hero call with the king high, and he's got, 2 pair or something like that, and you just look like a complete jackass. Fold the hand, just make the smart call, fold the hand. Don't try to do something too cute to try and impress yourself or impress somebody else or whatever else. And I think a lot of times we fall into that trap with the NFL market of, man, I'm going to get real cute here. I'm going to take this team because nobody wants to take this team. You know why nobody wants to take that team? Because they're effing terrible. And I think that I fall into that trap so many times here in the NFL where I try to get too cute. I don't simplify my handicap. I don't sit there and say, you know what? This team's just a hell of a lot better, and I know I'm paying a premium, but I'm going to take them anyway. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a recipe for success either, because then the team that's really, really good is going to go -2 in turnovers for the first time all season and not cover the number. But to me, I don't know. Maybe the NFL just needs to be this ridiculously simplistic handicap of play the good teams, fade the bad teams, and hope you get the mediocre teams in the right spot.
I could see it a little bit this year because your worst teams aren't covering. I mean, the Jets and the Cowboys, and you're certainly starting to pay premiums.
Well, let's talk about this. Pittsburgh and Dallas, right? You and I both talked about this game before the show off air. Pittsburgh's in a god-awful. I mean, this might be the worst spot
one of the worst spots ever.
And Dallas is just that bad that maybe 14's not enough. And are we going to fall into the trap, you and I, of taking Dallas and then Pittsburgh wins, 28-7?
Yep.
Is that
probably? Probably. I'm going to take Dallas plus 14. I want to take 14.5. I want to see where the market positions itself, but I'm going to take it because I want to be the smartest guy in the room, and nobody wants to bet Dallas. And they're 0-8 against the spread, and they're taking on the last remaining unbeaten team. I just want to shove it in everybody's face. I'll take Dallas, although not as strong. I'm not going to be floating a big couple $1,000 ticket on the Cowboys like it was Clemson against Notre Dame. But I'm not afraid to do it, and I'll probably end up blowing it in my face. I'll have a bet on Dallas when it's all said and done this week.
Or even something else like the Giants in Washington. The Giants play hard, right? I mean, they played very hard against Tampa Bay. They could have realistically won that game. They play hard. But you could make a case that neither one of those teams is worth your money in that Giants and Washington game. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to stare that game down. And I know it's 2.5 now, and it was 3.5 early in the week. I'm going to stare that game down, and I'm going to try and talk myself into one of those two teams. When the reality is, neither team is probably worth taking in the circa. But I may end up on one of them because I'm going to sit there and I'm going to try and force this position, force myself to think there's something actionable there because I don't want to go up against a game where there's maybe two good teams or two teams that are very, inconsistent. I know that these two teams are consistently bad, so I'll sit there and think to myself, well, I'll pick the one that's less bad. And I did that with the Giants in the first meeting, and they almost lost the game outright and failed to cover. So I don't know. Maybe I don't learn lessons, or maybe I'm not learning the right lessons in the NFL. But like I said, man, I'm trying to make hero calls on every game, and maybe I should just, look at what's in front of me instead.
And you're still 59-60% in circuit.
Right?
So it's not that bad, man.
No. God, I hate betting the NFL. I swear. There's some different rant I can climb on my soapbox about every single week. Last week it was, timeout usage and clock management and proven coaches doing stupid shit at the ends of games. So I guess just tune in next Thursday and we'll see what I have to bitch about then.
I'm here for you, buddy.
I know you are. This show is very therapeutic for both of us.
Yes.
Well, and you know what? It's always great to chat here on the show with Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper from bradpowersports.com. And what's up over at the website this week, man?
You know what? I said I was going to do it, and I did. I dropped the price on my newsletter, and 1 year I touted up a little. But it's $9 for the rest of the season. College and pro, game write-up on every single game. Where we have every conference playing in football, and it's going to be a race. It's not like you just got 1 month of football and then it's bowl games. I mean, basically you got almost 2 months of football because everybody's playing regular season games for 3 weeks in December. So you got plenty of football action, both college and the NFL. And for the rest of the entire season, it's $49. We're having my best year ever as far as college football. We're also having my worst year ever as far as the NFL. Add that all up and you're 56%. Which is what I am historically in the last 6 years in that newsletter. So if you want to win a little bit more than you lose, it's for you. If you just want to look at power ratings information on every single game, every single week, that's why you buy it. $49, bradpowersports.com.
Yeah, make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. Brad, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me, brother. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good, buddy.
There you go. There's Brad Powers. Once again, professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers over at bradpowersports.com, at Brad Powers and the number 7 on Twitter. Coming up on Friday, after that rant about the NFL, I'll come up with some thoughts for Week 9 in the Circus Sports Million, give you an update on where everything stands in the contest, my picks, my leans here as we head on into the weekend. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.